All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. And this one is going to be a wild one.
Definitely wild.
So we're talking about AI again, which is always fun, always interesting, and always seems to be making headlines.
It certainly does.
Yeah, especially in the legal system. And, this case that we're going to look at today is really interesting because it brings up this idea of AI hallucinations,
Hmm.
which I think a lot of people have heard about but maybe don't fully understand. So we're going to try and really break that down today and see how it plays out in this case.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this one is particularly interesting because, it deals with this lawsuit in Minnesota challenging a law about deepfakes.
Yeah, it's like the use of deepfake technology to influence an election or something like that. It's a mouthful.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a pretty specific law. And, the lawsuit itself is pretty interesting. But the real kicker is this affidavit that was submitted in support of the law.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
So basically, there's suspicion that this affidavit actually used AI to fabricate academic research, like make up citations and stuff.
No way.
Mm.
Really? That's crazy, especially for something as serious as a legal document.
Right. I mean, you think that would be the one place where everything's got to be, accurate and verifiable, but that might not be the case here.
So, what are we talking about here? How do they catch this fake research?
Well, there are two citations in the affidavit that have raised red flags. One is for a study called The Influence of Deepfake Videos on Political Attitudes and Behavior, supposedly published in the Journal of Information Technology and Politics.
Okay, and what's the problem with that?
It doesn't exist. Like, no one can find this study, no record of this journal. It's just poof, gone.
Wow, so they just totally made it up.
It seems that way. And there's another one too. Deepfakes and the illusion of authenticity. Cognitive processes behind misinformation acceptance. No publication information given for that one at all, and again, no one can find it.
So it seems like someone was trying to make their legal arguments stronger by citing research that just doesn't exist.
Exactly. And this is where the whole idea of AI hallucinations comes into play.
All right, so break it down for me. What exactly is an AI hallucination?
Okay, so these large language models, like we've talked about before, like ChatGPT, they're amazing at mimicking human language. But the
Wow.
way they do it is by predicting the next word in a sequence based on all this data they've been trained on.
Right, like they're not actually understanding the information, they're just really good at predicting what comes next.
Exactly. And that's where the problem comes in, because sometimes they can predict something that sounds super plausible, like these citations, but it's actually completely fabricated.
So AI is basically making stuff up.
In a way, yes. And it's not always intentional. These hallucinations can happen because of biases in the training data, or just because the model is trying to come up with something that fits the pattern it's been given.
That's a little scary. So how does this impact the legal system? I mean, obviously it's bad if people are submitting fake evidence, but what are the bigger implications?
Well, think about it. This case could set a precedent for how courts deal with AI-generated content in general.
Right, could we start to see more cases where people are using AI to create fake documents or evidence?
Potentially. And then how do you verify that information? Will lawyers need to have special training to spot AI hallucinations? Could we see new laws or regulations to try and control this?
It's like a whole new world of legal issues.
Exactly. And it's not just limited to the legal system either. Think about journalism, academia, even just everyday life. If AI can create this convincing fake information, how do we know what to trust anymore?
That's a good point. I mean, I consider myself pretty tech savvy, but I'm not sure I could always spot a really sophisticated AI hallucination. Could you?
Honestly, it's getting harder and harder. The technology is advancing so quickly that even experts can be fooled sometimes.
That's unsettling. So what do we do about it? If we can't even trust the experts, how do we protect ourselves from being misled?
Well, it's not all doom and gloom. There are things we can do. The most important thing is to be aware of the problem.
Okay, so knowledge is power,
Mhm.
but what else can we do?
We need to develop our critical thinking skills. Don't just take information at face value, especially online. Question everything. Check sources, look for corroborating evidence, and be aware of your own biases.
So it's about being a more discerning consumer of information.
Exactly. And it's also important to think about the sources of information.
Right, like who's creating it and why.
Exactly. And in this case, the affidavit we've been talking about was submitted by Jeff Hancock, the founding director of the Stanford Social Media Lab.
And I'm guessing he's an expert on misinformation.
You would think so, right? But he hasn't responded to any requests for comment on this whole situation.
That's interesting. So we don't know for sure if he used AI to write the whole affidavit or if those citations were added manually.
Right. It's possible that someone else could have tampered with the document, or that the citations were just a careless mistake.
But it's still pretty concerning that this is happening in a legal context. And it's kind of ironic, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Well, this law that's being challenged, it's designed to combat election misinformation. And now it looks like it might be relying on misinformation itself.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. The irony is not lost there. And, this really raises questions about the responsibility that individuals and institutions have when they're using these AI tools.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not like AI is going away anytime soon.
Definitely not. And as it becomes more sophisticated and more accessible, we're likely to see more of these cases where fabricated information slips through the cracks.
So what's the solution? I mean, besides being more skeptical and checking our sources, is there anything else we can do to protect ourselves from these AI hallucinations?
I think a big part of it is going to be on the tech companies themselves.
Okay, so how do we hold them accountable?
Well, they need to be more transparent about how these AI models are developed and trained, and they need to build in safeguards to prevent them from being used to create harmful content like misinformation.
That makes sense. But ultimately, it sounds like a lot of the responsibility falls on us as individuals.
It does, and I know it can feel overwhelming, but it's important to remember that we're not powerless. We can choose to be informed, to be critical, and to demand better from the technology that's shaping our world.
That's a great point. We don't have to just be passive consumers of information. We can be active participants in shaping the future of AI. This has been a fascinating and slightly terrifying deep dive.
I agree.
I think it's safe to say that AI is going to continue to challenge our understanding of truth and reality.
Absolutely. And it's up to all of us to be prepared for that challenge.
Well said. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive. And for our listeners, I think the takeaway here is clear. In the age of AI, critical thinking is more crucial than ever. Stay vigilant and don't believe everything you read or hear, even if it comes from a seemingly reputable source.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks again for listening, everyone. Until next time, stay curious.
And stay skeptical.